And you should have your Bibles at Colossians 3 now. Let's jump in. Who's ready for week 4? Let's go. Let's go to work. Paul says, if you then have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Thank you, Jesus. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these things, the wrath of God is coming. And these you too once walked when you were living in them. Say, I used to be lost, right? But now you must put them all away. Anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices, and now you have put on your new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creators. I'm going to stop right there. Today, if you're taking notes, which I hope that you are, you can title this message, The Power of Habit. The power of habit. Come on, look at your neighbor and say, it's time to get a new habit. It's time to get a new habit. It's time to get a new habit. Man, I'm excited for this message, the power of habit. You know, so me and my wife, we're about to celebrate our 5-year wedding anniversary, right? It's going to be fun. We're going to celebrate New York. What? Which is a crazy story. Me and my wife have not been on a trip together by ourselves. We always go on vacation with like my family or her family. We haven't never been on a trip since our honeymoon, just by ourselves. So we're going to New York for our 5-year, and it's by ourselves, and I'm just super pumped up for it. So we've been married for 5 years, but it's crazy because when we first got married, can I talk about that for a second? When we first got married, things changed a lot in my life. You see, I grew up my whole life in habits, right? From 18 years to 20 years of my life living with my parents and stuff, I'm a routine guy. Everything was in routine. Come on, some of you men know that. You were independent, and it's like once you became a newlywed, everything changed. All the habits you used to have, something probably changed. And let me tell you about one of my habits, right? So I had this habit. This was just one of my habits when I was growing up, and that I had to sleep in complete darkness, right? I needed all the lights off. The TV's got to be off. I need some kind of sound, like an air blower or something. Like, it was routine. Like, I had to have it down like that, or I would just have a difficult time sleeping. Like, I hated sometimes going to our youth camp when I was younger because it would be so eerily quiet in the dorm. And I was like, I can't sleep like this, right? My mind had come up with this habit. Well, then I got married. And I just thought, just going to keep doing what I'm doing. But Leah was like, I can only sleep if the TV is on. For all you single men in the house, when you get married, you're going to lose that battle. Just telling you that. Right? You're going to lose that battle. So here we are living together, and I got to start learning how to sleep with a TV on. Guys, it was so hard to go to sleep at night. I would wake up in the morning with all these like eye boogers, like crust all over my eyes because it just was so different. My body it was a habit that just happened. But it was crazy, right? Because now you fast forward 5 years, and I have to have the TV on to go to sleep. Is that crazy or what? Like, it has to, like, I don't need something like a sound or anything like that. As long as the TV's on, I'm fine. I can go to sleep. It's crazy because my mind literally retrained myself, retrained my habit, and changed that. It's the power of a habit. It's crazy. It's the power of your mind. Think about it. When you go to get up in the morning and you go get dressed, right? You probably never thought about this. When you pick up your pair of pants, I guarantee you there's a certain leg that you always start with subconsciously. Always. Me, it's my right leg, right, when I think about it. If you think about it, it's like, well, I do. I probably, and you probably have a routine. You probably put maybe your pants on first, then your shirt, and then like maybe you put your right arm through, and then you're like everything is habit. It's routine. You're going through your day and doing this. Or what about this habit, right? Have you ever drove home from, you ever drove home from work, right? A lot of us commute to and from work. Have you ever drove home from work, and then you pull up in your driveway and you're like, how in the world did I just get home? I don't remember passing the gas station. I don't remember passing Walmart. I don't remember passing that crazy lady that usually cuts me off at this time of day. Like, it just didn't happen. Your mind is so strong that even though you drifted into la-la land, your subconscious still got you home. It's the power of habit. It's the power of how strong your mind is. And many of us, the crazy thing, if our mind is that strong, that's why we did this series, because many of us have our mind that works against us, right? That's what the trash talker is. We're going to look at the definition again. So if you're just jumping in, the trash talker, it's the negative voice in your mind that controls your thoughts, right? So the voice you believe is the future you experience in your life. So if I'm listening to the wrong things and my mind is working against me, then what's happened? If you're listening to the trash talk, you're forming bad habits, bad negative patterns in your life, and you're going through that subconsciously without even realizing how it's affecting you. But can I tell you that God created you not for your mind to work against you, but to work for your good? Right? He worked for your good. And over the last 3 weeks, man, we've been going to work. We've been going to war against the trash talker. And we've been after him. We've learned how to identify the trash talker. Remember, we got to identify who he is and what he's saying. So maybe the trash talker is his fear. Maybe it's guilt, shame, discouragement, insecurity. Everybody has one. I told you mine was doubt, right? My trash talker is doubt. So we had to identify who it is, and then we want to identify what he's saying. Then the second week, we learned basically how to what? Come on, somebody tell me what it was. Reject it, right? So then we had to learn how to reject it. We had to reject the trash. So now I know what the trash talker's saying about me, and I'm rejecting it because what my Father says is so much better than what my negative thoughts say. So I've rejected it, and last week we talked about replacing it. Because even if you've rejected it, you can stay in this perpetual pattern, this attitude of still like depression or stress or overwhelmed, and because you've rejected it, but now you've got to replace it with who God is and what he says about you and his word, what he can do. So that's what we've been learning how to do. And today we're going to wrap up the process. Today we're going to finish the process. And you're like, well, we got one more week left, right? Well, actually, next week is still trash talk, but I'm going to hit a very strong subject that a lot of people deal with. I'm going to talk about anxiety next week. Really a message just on it, because I believe anxiety is the root of a lot of problems. And so I'm going to talk about that. But this week, we're going to retrain our minds. We're going to finish up the process, and we are going to learn how to teach our minds how to think differently, to form a better habit, to change our habit from listening negative thoughts to listening who God says I am and how to live that life. Amen? Right? And you have Paul right here. Paul is writing in this book of Colossians. He's writing a letter. It was around his third year of ministry in Ephesus where Paul was at. And during that time, there was a Colossian. His name was Epaphras. And Epaphras had traveled to Ephesus and heard Paul. Theologians believe that he heard Paul's proclamation of the gospel. He heard the gospel and it changed his life. And once it changed his life, he couldn't help but want to tell people about what Jesus was doing in his life. And so, guess what? He travels back to the city of Colossae and he starts a church. He begins to share the good news. He begins to share the gospel, and he starts what we call the church of Colossae. In Colossians 1, 7, and 8, this is how we know this. It says, just as Paul's writing, and Paul says, just as you learned it from who? Epaphras, our beloved fellow servant. He is a faithful minister of Christ on your behalf and has made known to us your love in the Spirit. So we know Epaphras was probably the one who went and started this church of Colossae. But now, guess what? The church of Colossae was under attack. Because anytime something good has happened from the Lord, the enemy's going to try to come in and steal it. And so they're under attack with a bunch of false teaching that was happening, some Gnostic ideas that was going on. And with that, Paul hears about it. So Paul's writing them a letter to kind of like give them some encouragement, right? He's writing them a letter and he's trying to tell them, basically, hey, I need you to learn how to live in a godly way. I need you to learn how to put your mind on things above, how to not fall for these earthly false teachings and what's happening. I need you to be able to think wiser. I need you to be stronger. And so the book of Colossians that you read, this letter, it's a really, this idea of forming new habits. For someone to live, to put their old self away and to be a new self, to live in a new way and not let something control where they're headed. So that's what we have with Paul right here. And so I believe many of us, I believe we're dealing with this trash talker. We're dealing with a trash talker, and we've let him form bad habits in our life. Because you constantly hearing in your mind, you're just not good enough, or you're not important, or you'll never be loved, or you're not beautiful. You constantly hear him. Those people will never like you. You constantly hear him in the back of your mind, and those thoughts have now created bad habits because you've believed them, you've stayed in them, and a lot of times once you have thought it and once it becomes a bad habit, it becomes a bad decision. Bad decisions that we make, where we get into addictions, where we get into the wrong relationships, where we get into living a life that is completely out of God's will for your life. It's what happens. It's crazy how that can happen. And I believe if we would realize the power of a habit is real, and if we're intentional about changing the destructive habits in our life, and I think you're going to see true change, and you're going to see what Paul's talking about when you take your old self away and you bring the new self in. So, another practical message for you guys today. Identify it, reject it, replace it. Now we're looking about changing habits. And Paul, I think, got 3 things that I want to show you in this passage of what Paul's doing. Look back at verses 1 and 2 in Colossians 3. It says, if you have then been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Look at your neighbor and say above. Where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things on earth. So point number one for you is this. You got to remind yourself of the process. You got to remind yourself of the process. For you that maybe just jumping on this, we have on our website, you can go back and watch week 1, week 2, week 3. But what this point is, and I'm going to explain it, is reminding yourself of the process, reminding yourself of the identify, reject, replace. I'm going to show you how this goes, because Paul starts off simple. If you want to see true change in your life, if you want to see God move in your life, then you've got to learn how to think in a godly way. You've got to learn how to put your thinking higher, on the things above, your mind there. And see, that's, like I said, it's what we've been exactly going through in this series. We're learning how to take our mind and think about these things instead of what the negative voice is saying. So we identify it, we reject it. So I'm identifying what is good and what is bad. I'm not letting what bad is taking root in my mind. I'm identifying what is good so I can start a good seed, right? Then I'm rejecting it. I'm not letting this bad thought take root in my heart. I'm not going to let it control where I'm going. I'm not going to let it produce anything. And then I'm going to replace it with God's way of thinking, his higher way of thinking, his better way of thinking. And so that's why I said when we look at this point, and Paul's saying, look, you got to keep your mind on things above. I'm telling you, we got to remind ourselves of the process. To identify, to reject, and to replace what the trash talker is saying in our life. Because if you're going to remind yourself of the process, guess what? You're going to have to repeat the process. You got to remind yourself of the process so you can repeat the process. You can't just expect to one time to follow the homework, right? The homework that we've been doing, where we've been writing down our trash talker and getting rid of the trash talker, right? We can't expect to do this one time and win all the time. You got to repeat the process. You got to repeat it. And this is cool because doctors, you know what doctors say? Doctors says it takes at least 21 days to create a new habit. A new habit. About 21 days of doing something over and over again in order to form a new habit, right? So if you want to start doing something new, you want to make that happen, you got to do something consistently for a while before it becomes a habit. It's just how life, that's how your mind works. And I remember how at the beginning of the series I told you that your mind literally thinks of 60,000 thoughts per day. Per day, 60,000 thoughts. And statistics say that 80% of those thoughts are negative. So 48,000 of them would be negative. That's the trash talk in your life trying to feed that quota, right? And so if we're going to have to beat the trash talker, then we've got to make ourselves being like reminding, it's got to be a habit. It's got to become a habit. I got to remind myself that I'm at war with the trash talker every day. See, I believe the problem is most of us, we've been losing the battle against the trash talker because it's our habit to lose. It's simply our habit, you know. It's our habit to listen to what he says. And some of us, man, we start to win a few days. You win like 10, 11 days and you're going good. But the moment something bad happens in your life and you get super weak, you haven't quite reached that 21 day for it to form a habit. So you give up and guess what? You're back into the bad habits. Back into the bad habit of doing this. And we don't do it consistently enough in order to really form a new habit, right? The kids are having a blast right now, right? I think that's why we got to be intentional about reminding ourselves of the process so that we can form a new habit. If we constantly remind ourselves on how to deal with the trash talker, to put our minds on things above, to identify, reject, and replace, and you do it for 21 days, you do it for a month, guess what you're going to start to see? What used to be a struggle in beating the trash talker is now going to become easy because it's a good habit, it's a positive habit, and you don't let the devil tell you anything else. Amen. That's crazy. It will happen that easily when you form that new habit. Matter of fact, it's so cool what Paul says in Romans 12:2. Look at this. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, right? So that part right there, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. I look at that point as like forming a new habit. It's going to take 21 days to form a new habit, to identify, reject, and replace, and get that trash talker out of there. And then guess what? He says, once you've done that, man, you're going to be able to test and discern what is the will of God. It's going to come natural to you to listen to the right voice. It's going to be easier for you to win. It's going to be easier to hear God's voice above all others. Because I've formed a healthy habit, I've identified, I've rejected, I've replaced, and now I'm living in God's presence. I'm letting God dwell in me. And so we've got to remind ourselves of the process so that we can repeat the process. I think when you form this new habit of listening to the right voice, your mind's going to be transformed and you're going to see something so new in your life. But it starts with being intentional about reminding yourself of the process. Me and Leah, I felt convicted a few weeks, actually a couple months ago now, because I would get up here when I would do the relationship series and I'd be like, you should pray with your spouse. But I never did it, right? And I never want to be a guy that comes up here and preaches and doesn't do what I preach. And so if I'm telling people they should pray with their spouse, it's like, I gotta do it. And I know I got to make it a habit. And so I started about 2.5 months ago now, I started grabbing her hand and praying. But then I found myself going a night or two and forgetting. And I was like, man, and then I would do it and I'd forget. And I was like, this ain't consistent. How can I be consistent? And I was trying to figure out a way. But when I was studying for this series and I saw this point, I started thinking about how you can do it. You see, if I would have a reminder in place, then I'd be able to help me change my habit and change that habit happening or whatever. So this is what went down. I realized that one thing I do with Leah every night before I go to bed is I give her a good night kiss. So I wanted to subconsciously tell myself, I cannot kiss her goodnight until I prayed with her. And since I've been doing that, I haven't missed a day for a long time now, right? But I want you to catch. I'm not trying to glorify myself. I want you to try to catch what I did. I set myself something to remind me, right? I subconsciously set something up to remind myself. And because I did that, I was able to start forming this new habit. That's why you got to be, and for everybody in here, I can't just tell you what's got to be your reminder. You've got to make that personal to you. You got to figure out how you can figure out in your own mind to remind yourself so you don't keep listening to the negative thoughts in your life. You've got to figure out your own niche to make that happen, right? And so I am reminding myself of the process to keep my mind on things above, so I can repeat the process and I can keep beating the trash talker every day. And it's going to get easier and easier. Amen? Then Paul, he goes on to say this. In verse 5, he says, now I need you to put to death. He's talking to the church of Colossae, but man, it is so relevant for us. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, any sexual immorality, any impurity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these things, the wrath of God is coming. Next verse. It says, in these you too once walked when you were living in them, but now you must put them all away. Anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. Next verse. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have what? You've put off the old self. I've changed the old habit, and I'm going to practice and have put on the new self, the new habits. And when I read this, I thought of, for our next point, number 2, you got to change your routine. Once you've reminded yourself of the process, to identify, reject, and replace, now you got to change your routine. You got to be intentional about doing that. You know, sometimes this part right here, man, sometimes this part can be super hard. This is the hardest part, is to actually change the routine of what you've been doing forever. Because, guys, I didn't just start sleeping with the TV on in 1 week. It felt like months before I got a good night's sleep, just taking that in because my mind was having to retrain itself. But it can take some time. But I believe what it requires us to do is it's going to require you to take a step back and evaluate where your heart is. Evaluate where your heart's at and what actions you're making because of your heart. What it's going to take is we've got to drop the selfishness and the pride. So easy. It sounds so easy, but it's so hard for some of us because we don't like to see our problems. We like to see everybody else's problems. That's why Jesus said, stop looking at the splinter in his eye when you got a log in yours. Right? Man, I got to drop my selfishness. I got to drop my pride so I can really be intentional about seeing what's happening in my heart. What's happening, because the key thing is most of these actions that you do, it follows themselves all the way back to the trash talker. I believe before you do anything, you always starts as a thought before it ever happens. I do. You know, like I was watching this show one time. Leah had some show on, and it was like, he's like, I didn't mean to cheat on her. It just happened. You know, the guy's saying that. I didn't mean to cheat on her. It just happened. It just, and you're trying to explain to his wife, it just happened, you know. No, can I tell you, that is a lie. It did not just happen. It started as a thought. It started as a trash talker of lust that was in that mind saying, your wife, she won't care. She doesn't look at you like they look at you, and da-da-da, and just going on and on. It starts in a thought, and as your thought starts to poison your heart, it then becomes an action. It can happen that quick, and I've seen that. It starts with the trash talk. It's like if you're a person that's angry all the time. You're angry and you just hate people. You hear people like that, I just hate people, right? You hear that term all the time. You're angry and you just hate people. Man, it's not just, that's not natural for you. You're created in the image of God. You're created to love. But the trash talker is a thought in your mind saying that everybody's out to get you, that nobody likes you, and therefore, since you're listening to this negative thought in your mind, you're assuming the worst of everybody and you're being angry to them. It's making that action happen. It starts as a thought, it poisons your heart, it becomes an action. That easy, and that's why we have to be intentional about changing the routine up, changing our routine. When I think about this point and what we're making, I say this prayer over me. Anytime I'm looking at my heart and I know something's wrong with me and I need to evaluate my heart and I need to change my routine, I look at this verse. I wanted to share it with you guys because this verse is close to my heart. Psalms 139, verses 23 and 24. Can I tell you this is one of the most dangerous prayers to ever pray in your life? There's a pin down here. One of the most dangerous prayers to ever pray in your life is this Psalms right here. The psalmist David, he says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Some of you like, God does not need to know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. God definitely don't need to look inside my thoughts, right? And he says, and see if there's be any grievous way in me and lead me in the way of everlasting. Man, such a powerful prayer to pray. That's what it's a prayer. And I believe if we're intentional about saying, God, just look at my heart. God, expose what's in me that's causing me to look at the negative thoughts and keep that same routine up. Expose it, help me find the truth, and if it's there, God, help me. Give me peace, give me strength, give me joy. Let me get out of this funk that is making me with these negative patterns because I know this ain't for my life. Let me have a positive routine. Let me have a positive pattern. Man, you begin to pray that, God begins to change your life. Prayer changes things completely. So you've got to identify what these actions are and realize that they're happening. You're making bad decisions because of your trash talker. Simply, he's working you like a puppet. And that's why we've got to deal with him and get him over, because it's time to change up the routine, right? Look at your neighbor and say, it's time to change up the routine. I ain't listening to that voice anymore. Let me go. Some of you might be thinking, well, I need more practicality. What are you talking about, Pastor? What are you talking about? Because I get it. I got to change my routine up. I got to figure this out. Well, put it this way. You ever saw an ad that was like, lose 30 pounds in 4 weeks. All you got to do is buy this product and do this exercise, and you'll see results in no time. You've seen those kind of like ads before. Most women are like, sign me up, just trying to jump on and stuff and make it happen. But it's crazy because, you see, we desire in our lives, we desire to make massive changes in our life, and we want them to happen fast. We have this like right now mentality. It's like, I always think of the stupid commercial. It's like, it's my money and I want it now. It's like, we have such a right now mentality. Things got to change for us now. Things got to change to happen. And the crazy thing about God is when he's going to do something in your life, sometimes he waits till the last minute to do it. He wants you to work on patience. But, we have this right now mentality. And we want to change the way we're thinking because starting a new habit can be difficult. So we start off strong, right? We start off so strong, but when you start off strong, it's so easy to get discouraged really quick. It's like if you're like, I'm going to work out, I'm going to do it, I'm going to buy the products, and I'm going to be in the gym every day. Eventually, it just dwindles out, so it's not happening anymore, right? That's because I believe if you want to start a new habit, you need to start small. You got to start small. Sometimes we try to go with the right now mentality, and all it does is it takes a special kind of determined person sometimes to do that. Some of us, what we got to do is we got to take a step back. We got to evaluate our heart, and if we want to start a new habit, we got to start somewhere small. See, for example, if anger is your problem and you hate people and the negative thoughts in your mind is done, but now you learn how to identify, reject, and replace, and now you're reminding yourself of the process and you're ready to change your routine, one thing you could do? Just start being kind to one person a day. One person a day. Do it for 21 days. Make one maybe if it's a coworker, you just tell them, encourage them. Hey man, thank you so much for working so hard beside me all the time. Or maybe it's your family members. Maybe you haven't called your mom in a while and just said, Mom, I love you and I thank you for everything you've done for me and what you're doing for me. If you one person a day. And watch how easy after 21 days it becomes a new habit. You've now changed your routine. You're doing it subconsciously because you've learned how to create that habit. And now you went from someone who is Mr. Grumpy to someone who is encouraging people, who's loving people. And that's where it starts. You see, I'm not letting the trash talker control my thoughts anymore. I'm going to be intentional about identifying, rejecting, and replacing it so I can start this new routine, right? And being kind to others. And I want to learn how to love like Jesus. Man, it's start small. Some of it's like devotion time. I got to read my Bible every day, and you go for it. And then you find yourself after a week, it's like, oh, I only read my Bible twice this week. Or I only read my Bible once last week, and now it's collecting dust. You started off strong, but it just dwindled. Maybe you got to start off small. Maybe you just need to do a Tuesday and Thursday thing for right now. You're on Tuesday, Thursday. Set something up to remind yourself. Change your routine because you need God's word in order to beat the trash talker, right? You've got to start small. Let me tell you something, and you might want to write this one down. Lasting change is a product of new habits, not a once-in-a-lifetime transformation. Lasting change in your life is the product of making daily habits, good habits, not a once-in-a-lifetime change. It's the power of a habit. Can you bring up that verse 9 and 10 again for me? Because that's what Paul says. Paul says, look, it's time for you to put the old self away. The old habits that keep getting you in all the trouble, that keep getting you away from the will of God, it's time to put that away. It's time to remind yourself of the process. It's time to change your routine up, because when you change your routine up, you're going to put on the new self, and man, oh man, you're going to see what God can do in your life. Can I tell you what? When you begin to live in this way and you don't let the negative trash talker control your thoughts anymore, you will begin to live with fulfilled potential in your life. Jesus came to give you life. He came to give you life abundantly, and he wants you to see you enjoy life. He wants to see you thriving in life. He didn't call you to just survive in your life. He told you to overcome in this life. And I'm going to be able to do that when the trash talker is not in my life. Come on, I'm preaching better than you're amening right now. And God has your back always. Always. Change your routine up. Be intentional about it. I don't want to be a doubter anymore. I don't want to be someone who was that person. I was open with you guys. Remember, I am eternally grateful for this man over here. I don't even know if I've told you this yet, because I told myself, I'm about to be really vulnerable with you guys right now, but you know that's me. I'm an open book. You know, being a young pastor and trying to grow a church out of nothing, it's tough at times. And I remember this point where like I was doubting because we weren't really growing and stuff like that. And I just like, And I always told myself I would never be that pastor that would speak negatively about like attendance and stuff in front of my members. But because I was letting the trash talker of doubt control my thoughts, I saw myself doing it. One day I'm standing outside waiting for you guys to pull into church, right? And I'm like, man, I don't know if anybody's coming today. And Snooky grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, man, the people here count. And it I got convicted. I noticed I was doing the same thing I told myself I never would, but that's because the trash talker, he was poisoning my mind. And I realized that I had to beat it, and if I was going to beat it, I had to do something to change the routine up. So I did. I learned a different sense of gratitude, and I went into my mirror, and I wrote, I am thankful for who is here. And I underlined it. Every morning when I get up and I'm brushing my teeth, I say that line to myself 3 times every day. It don't bother me if there's 3 people in here anymore, because maybe one of them needs to hear the message I'm saying. Because the people here count. It completely changed my routine. And I came in here on Sundays. I got to come here not feeling like, oh, people got to show up. I came in here just ready to worship. Came in here ready to see the people that were here. And me and Leah, we've been doing this thing now where we've changed our routine. Instead of saying like, I'm working on this, but saying this person was out of town, this person out of town, we look at the attendance and you're like, you know what? 35, 40 people decide to wake up this morning and come to church on a mission. How awesome is that? You know, it changed. And guess what? That trash talker doesn't have a hold on us anymore in that area, because we changed the routine up. That's why Paul was super cool, because right after, I didn't read this person, but in Colossians 3, and it starts in verse 12, Paul goes on to say this. After he's told them about putting their mind on things above, and after telling them to put the old self away and put new habits into place, he says this. He's like, put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgive each other. And as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God, the Father, through him. You see, once you've learned how to remind yourself of the process, I've identified, rejected, replaced, and I can do that. Once you've changed up your routine, and you start living with the positive patterns, point number 3 is you begin to reap your reward. Come on, you begin to reap your reward. Paul shows us that a godly way of living leads to a heart that is kind, that is humble, that is patient, that is loving, that is forgiving, that works in perfect harmony with the Creator who God created you to be. And no longer, I don't listen to these bad thoughts and these negative thoughts that try to poison me and tell me what to do. No, it's not a part of me anymore. I still got to fight the battle. He's still there. I told you from the beginning, there's no way you can magically wipe the trash talker out of your life. He's always going to be there. But if you're intentional about creating a new habit of identifying, rejecting, and replacing, oh my goodness, you're going to reap the reward. I'm reaping the reward right now when I get to come in here on Sundays, not worried about who's at church, but just get to worship with my church family. A pureness, man. It's an incredible thing what God will do there. And when the power of the trash talker no longer has a hold on your body, you're going to see a new self start living in freedom like you've never lived in before, because your mind is now not captive to the enemy, but it's set free by God who wants you to think a higher way. With everybody heads bowed, eyes closed, and you can stand on your feet.